We're on the Gap Savvy podcast. Last time we talked about all of these basic guardrails and foundational concepts for generative AI and agentic AI use cases for business. And we covered a lot of groundwork in the last video. So if you didn't watch the last one, go watch the last one. Today, we're going to cover more about skills and some other more advanced use cases. Still, I think this is part of the foundational lecture, but you and I are going to go back forth and continue this lecture series through a variety of other concepts like practical applications. And you and I are always talking back and forth what might be most useful to the audience. But this should wrap up the, first part of the lecture series, I think, for the foundational things everyone should know. So everyone who's watching, feel free to continue to support and watch the last one or subscribe or whatever you can to continue to support these. But we'll continue on, and I'll try to be better about that going forward. But we ended last time talking about like how really context is actually a confusing concept, and how a lot of people don't really understand their processes and their goals in the first place in a roadmap of what they're trying to accomplish and what they need to accomplish it. And ultimately, once you can determine your probabilistic versus deterministic approaches and figure out your process and understand it a little better, you can put all that into a folder, and the folder is going to be the brain or the context for your process. And there's some rules that you should have when you're doing that. You make sure you're using the right data and the right tools, that you have scoped access and approvals on, and specific guardrails for putting this in place. And Angela, you just did a big talk on, internal controls, and I think this is an evolving area, and I'd be curious on your place, because I was thinking of how challenging it is to actually give guidance on the appropriate guardrails for these evolving tools over the time. And I kind of like to keep it more general. Like, if you're going to give a folder, and you're going to use a folder, maybe don't put it on your SharePoint, don't have the original files in it. Make sure you have your scoped access, and thus access is scoped appropriately. So like your tool doesn't have access to your whole company's files. It just has access to this specific folder. And you probably you want to have approvals on, at least at first, to make sure you understand what the AI is doing. And when I mean approvals on, I mean the AI should ask you for approval before it takes actions, rather than you just letting it run nonstop. But I don't know, anything to add here on like high level guardrails? There's obviously a lot of nuances here when you start getting in the internal control world. But for just people starting out, how should they think about like safe guardrails without slowing down their speed?
Yeah. Let me give a tiny bit of context first, because in case people start here, the last one we talked about was about context. Context is a very general term of basically your part, everything you give the model. And today we're moving into folders as context, meaning that we're moving on to the desktop versions of a lot of these models. So like Cowork, what does ChatGPT call it? ChatGPT Work or
Codex.
something?
Yeah, now it was Codex, now it's ChatGPT Work. Yeah.
Basically what it is for a non-technical user, I'm going to point it as a file instead of having to go through the terminal and seeing the little black blinky thing. I know there's a better term for that, but I just feel like that's easier to say. So when we talk about guardrails now, there are many places you can put them. One of them is, of course, within your prompt. Don't do this. Be sure that you don't do that, in caps, right? You can see that that's like, if you think about how that works in a human, it's like just as good as a really stern talking, which works a lot of the time, but it's not always. Now we're talking about context in terms of folders. And as we go through this, I think some of the really important things and things that I got wrong when I first set up my desktop instances, is a lot of people it defaults and asks you for one of the top level folders. So in your computer, you have like user Angela, right? Angela has documents, pictures, right? Like your applications, right? Like all those things in the user. Do not give access at that level. That is a terrible idea. You should absolutely not do that. Do not do the default. Absolutely go further down into that tree, into a specific folder that you feel safe in. And Devin, like exactly like you said, yes, these tools are incredibly powerful, but they can also delete. Once you start getting into this world, they can take action on your folders. So one of the very prevalent examples that people would love to do is clean up my downloads, right? Which download folders are atrocious. Mine is completely embarrassing. But, there's probably some weird important stuff in there, which is why I keep accumulating it over I don't know how many years. But if you want to try to clean that, or there's sensitive data in it, like you need to make those decisions. But take a duplicate of that folder, do a copy, and then play with that copy. Because if it deletes it, you need to be okay with it. I think that's one of the most important things to say when we're talking about like safety and security and guardrails. And a lot of companies, especially at the enterprise level, they won't let you use products that are in beta. Coworker is definitely out of beta now. And now it's GA'd, but I know a lot of people struggled with it while it was in beta. And then even when it's an enterprise, a lot of InfoSec teams are saying it can only have access to this type of folder, or somewhere where there is like some more company level guardrails, because whatever level the folder is that you give it, it could potentially have access to everything on that level of folder. I think that's important because we don't really, like as accountants, we don't think like this. And so it is just some humility in knowing that you might not know. It should not stop you in playing. It just means that you don't give it that top level root folder. You go deeper and you make duplicates of some of the stuff you're working on so that you have a backup copy in case something goes wrong or you need to revert.
Yeah. Well said. And I will say in practice, I feel like especially finance and even just most business teams tend to be overly cautious with the approvals and kind of scared of them, rather than actually the other side where they accidentally delete things. I think I'm on the other end where I have accidentally deleted things I didn't want deleted. I learned the lesson the hard way. That's not fun, especially if you're like building a big website and you ask something to change and accidentally deletes it. You want to be really careful and have duplicates. But a lot of people I meet are just kind of scared when it says like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure this is dangerous? Like something that says the dangerously always allow kind of buttons. A lot of people get scared and just turn it off. I'd encourage you not to lean too far that way. Just make sure you have backups, right? Like it's just like you're giving to that staff. You wouldn't give a source file to your staff. Probably don't do the same with AI, right? And if it makes a delete, then you can always revert it to roll it back to a previous version, right? So well said. Well said on your part. So I appreciate that. And so I think then we're going to go into the meat of it, which is the next most common question I get from people is then, well, now let's say I finally have figured out my workflow. I'm happy with AI. I built out a process. I'm comfortable with the guardrails. Now, how do I actually repeat a process? Or how do I solve a specific use case that other people have solved before? And luckily, we have skills, and especially skill packs that Claude has made co-work. But there's a good question is like, what is a skill? And the way to think of it is just a combination of prompts, instructions for your specific use case, and connections to other applications, and in combination can solve a variety of specific use cases that have been either created by experts at Anthropic, where Anthropic's hired these experts in financial reporting and HR, et cetera, to write these prompt packs or these skill packs to solve use cases like building financial statements or closed slides or doing statistical analysis. Two, you can build these yourself. And then there's a bunch of public forums that have also created these all over Git. So that's the idea of how to do this. And you can build these skills yourself if you, for example, have a repeatable process that you would like the rest of your team to do that, to repeat every single on an instance, or for Claude to repeat. You can just have these tools create a skill pack essentially, or create a skill folder and files. And you can just send that to your teammates and then they can run that skill to create a similar outcome. And so I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that, but I found that skills, I will say, greatly changed the utility of co-work and of these agentic tools, where like if you use a dashboarding skill, you can create great, beautiful HTML dashboards that are as good or better than Tableau or Power BI much faster. But if you don't use the dashboarding skill, you might not get that output. It might create an Excel sheet or something else instead. So using these specific skill packs can be hugely valuable. And I almost think it like its own software within Claude, where you can like kind of do completely new things. It's like loading up the difference between Outlook and Excel. It can be that different when you're working within Claude Cowork. And there's hundreds of these skills now, which can drastically change the output. But I don't know your thoughts are, or how you think about skills.
Yeah, I think that one thing I want to first do is demystify what a skill is. It quite literally is a text document. So if you're feeling like, oh, I got to do a skills training before I can create a skill, and I can't start until I have a skill because Devin says my dashboard isn't going to be good. And what if my dashboard isn't good? I don't have a skill yet. Get that out of your head. This is like your first dashboard should be giving it a data set and saying, can you build me an insightful dashboard? I add insightful. I have no idea if it adds anything, but all I know is that the dashboard that it builds is better than anything I've ever seen or built in my life. Let's say you then like the dashboard that it made you. Or you want to say, can you go a level deeper and pull out some quotes? Or can you, sometimes I take a transcript and I'm like, sync it up with the chat and get a feeling for the room at this particular time. Once you get that dashboard to a place that you like it, then say, can you make a skill out of this? And it's like, okay, great, I'll make dashboarding skill. And every time you let's say later on you want something else in your dashboard, then you update your skill. But what this does is it basically says, it's almost like you create an operating system. And so before you were like typing, and every time you had to upload this thing or you had to point to this folder and say, make me a dashboard. And every dashboard was wonderful, but they were all slightly different. Now you're saying, use my dashboarding skill to create a dashboard. And you don't have to do it perfectly either. You can literally say, type in, use my dashboarding skill, right? Which is some of the flexibility, but you can also see how with some of the flexibility you might, it's not as rigid, or it's not anywhere near as rigid as code, because it's not deterministic. It's probabilistic still. It's a set of instructions, right? It's a standard operating procedure. But instead of typing something over and over again, you're saying, build me a dashboard with your data skill and your dashboarding skill, and make sure you use this design scheme skill that we talked about last week, right? So like, think about the three things. I just threw three things together, but basically you're compounding your old work. Which is really nice, because it's like, okay, well, cool. Like you figured out what colors I liked and how I like this thing set up. You like what data I like to pull, and you have already figured out how to structure it. So now I don't have to say those three things. I'm just going to like link them together, and you're going to know what to do. So that's what a skill is. And I think that it's where you get a lot, I don't want to use the word exponential, but you get a lot more leverage from your instance, because you've already prepackaged some of the stuff you like.
Yeah, exactly. And I like how you compounded the skills. I think that's really advantageous. Like if you have a writing style, you can have a writing style skill. And a lot of people create, like, you can feed it things you've written in the past, and then you can try to make it match your writing style or make edits to it. You can have a slide style skill. You can have templating. You can do all these different things and then compound your skills accordingly. So I think that's really advantageous to do the skill stack. And I like what you said. It is just a text document. Like if you go into your folder, it's nothing fancy. It's just it's a text document with a set of like very explicit instructions on informing your AI on your preferences, essentially. So cool. But I want to emphasize just how powerful these are. Like, I was able to build an entire set of financial statements for my business in like 10 minutes, pulling all my bank statements together and whatnot. And that would have been something that would have taken QuickBooks a while, even longer, to set up a QuickBooks instance. Like, there's some amazing things that you can do with these tools, just because the instructions were written so well. I want to get your take on this, because this is my personal sense and maybe this is evolving over time. Like, maybe connectors have their time and place. Like, I'm finding like more and more value in having draft emails in my outbox when I connect to my Gmail instance now. But I'm finding generally people's default reaction to this concept of connectors tends to be wrong, where part of skill packs, and you'll see a lot of times like skills and skill packs tend to have two instances, that text file and the fact that it can connect to a relevant piece of software. So like the financial statement skill pack connects to QuickBooks and has that set of instructions. You don't have to use a connector, but you can. What I found is when people use these connectors, they're generally disappointed, just because we go back to what we talked about in the last lecture about just like often too much context. Like, generally, it's pretty challenging for connector to connect to a completely other piece of software and then to know exactly what report to run or to pull from. And it's getting access to too much of the data, and it tends to have less efficacy unless you have specifically ran a specific report to connect it. So you kind of need like better planning in the forefront of it. And I've talked to a data engineer over at Google, one of the top data engineers over at Google in this space. And he was saying that this is a big problem in companies overall. Like the expectation is, why can't it just connect? Why can't I connect to all of my customer data and just ask it to generate a report of what happened last month? Well, it's like, well, there's just there might be way too much data for the AI to be able to contextualize. So I don't know what you're seeing though, or if you've used helpful connectors in your work.
Yeah, so I think where I'm getting to with this is when MCP or connectors or model context protocol first came out, people were like, oh my gosh, it's the new API. Like, you don't like, it's just like a plug and play. I can connect to anything. And I thought that too. And then you're like, cool, we'll plug in NetSuite. We'll grab everything here, maybe like some Salesforce, like pull it all together. This is going to be amazing. I've got a brain between all my systems.
Yeah.
And then I think as it's evolving, you actually have to think about MCPs and APIs differently, which is like an API is directed specifically at fields and report in a specific type of way. And yes, it's rigid, but it's really reliable. And you can bring over lots of specific data that you've engineered and architected that you know you need every single time. That's what an API is. And I say that I'm not technical, but I also feel like it's like, yeah, that's just what I would think a connector is. But we're accountants, remember, we're not like meaning that we handle large amounts of data, and not everyone does in a business sense. So we might have that perception. But now what an MCP is it's like taking a staff person, or even like forget a staff person, an accounting audit firm partner, and you're like, here's access to NetSuite, go figure it out. Do you think that like audit partner is going to know which report or what to do? Like, oh my gosh, like it is so difficult to run some reports. You like have to get the right parameter, make sure you pick the right name field, the date field, like, right? Like think about how confusing that can be, or how many variables, even a really intelligent brain going through a system, like a sea of just tables and systems and possibilities. And like, think about everybody's Salesforce instance. Every single one of those is customized. Every single one. Like there is no such thing as out of the box Salesforce at the enterprise level. It's just not a thing. And so if you think about that and you're trying to say like, oh, I'm going to use this magical MCP connector to pull in the right thing from Salesforce every single time, but every instance is customized, and therefore there's no like large library of like, this is how everyone's set up, right? Like, it's not going to be as reliable. It's not, because you're using the wrong tool.
Exactly.
And so I think that is really important, because you will be let down if that's what you thought it was. But it's also great because you also learn what it was. I always try to have that turn of like, okay, cool. So it's the little brain that can go and find things when you need it. Really, really good at Gmail, right? Really good at Slack. Really good at maybe finding all the nuances about one customer when you ask about one customer, and it's going to like feel around all the like tables that customer might be connected to. But should you have it pull in all of your financials that month? No, you shouldn't. It's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Like you should use an API for that. And I feel like that's just like learning the new tools in your toolbox, because look, we never could build an API ourselves, first of all. And now we can, which is weird. And then two, you've never had a little brain that connects a whole bunch of systems before, because you were just clicking around them yourself, but you were the brain.
Exactly.
And so that's how, at least where my thought process has evolved too. I was like, ooh, I was expecting too much, but I also didn't give myself the ability to realize this new little alien tool that we had, this MCP. It's not really an alien, but just like it's like how good I'm going to be at clicking around in someone's Salesforce instance that I'm not super familiar with yet.
Yeah, and I think I always love how you explain things. I think it's so helpful to contextualize like the difference between APIs and the MCP, because APIs, like the way I think about it, I was trying to build a food logger over the last week just to experiment, and it's very easy to connect to a database and pull up different barcodes and have all these databases of what the calorie contents and macros are for the specific food. API is great for that. But then it's much more challenging if you think of a QuickBooks instance, like you said, like clicking through all the different reports for your different company or Salesforce. And what I tend to think connectors like are going to be quite useful is, well, maybe you can summarize activity that happened recently related to something, or you can writing journal entries can be useful, like posting and proposing entries, but trying to get too much out of it is going to be quite challenging. It's a different tool. It's not going to be a 1-for-1 match like the API usage. And so just understanding how you use these different tools, similar to the probabilistic and the deterministic approaches, can be quite helpful. And so, I think that could be a good deeper dive sometime for everybody, of understanding the nuances. And I'm sure we're learning as we go, and these connectors will evolve over time.
Yeah.
But there's natural design limitations.
Exactly. That didn't work. So either, and I was just listening to something about like how to work with these models, and it's like, if it didn't work and you're doing model context protocol, that's the same thing we talked about in lecture 1, which was maybe you didn't give it the right context. That could be one of the failure modes. You did not say, get me everything from this customer, get me everything from this date. You didn't say, get me all the calorie counts for anything that is a fruit. I don't know. But so that's one way to mitigate that, and maybe bring up your accuracy and build some guardrails, blah, 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 blah. Or you can say, this is not the right tool, and every month I want these financials and these reports to be brought in, and then my MCP connector helps me grab extra context if I need it as I'm problem solving something. I think they're just different ways of using it, but you learn only by doing when it doesn't do the thing that you wanted to, in which case you have to go into deep self-reflection and say, is it me or is it something that it did? But either way, you'll learn.
Exactly. And I think that's a healthy outlook, just like we said last lecture. These tools are so new. It's good to have some humility and be like, maybe I don't know something here, and maybe it was me first before we blame the tool, which is also strange because we're used to, in the, just a couple of years ago, most often it was the tool. Like, you probably had the capability and the tool just didn't have the ability. Now we're kind of in this flip, or maybe we don't understand the tool or what it can accomplish. But yeah, very cool. And that goes into this next part, which I like, multi-model orchestration, and which has now become known more as like adversarial checking. But I think it's a little more advanced than that in some ways. Is how do you, if now you're using skill patch, you have the right context, how do you like optimize for the correct output? And one of the best ways you can optimize for the correct output is by adding adversarial checks. So what do we mean by adversarial checks? Well, I mean, we want to challenge our output with either the same model in a different instance or different models in order to improve the efficacy of whatever our outcome is. And so how do we do that? One of my favorite prompts is like, rate this on a scale of 1 to 10 for completeness, accuracy, timeliness, whatever it might be, whatever your rating criteria are. And that can ultimately decide it on like a self-improvement mechanism, where like it'll check itself and do better. But what we can even do better than that is then bring in other models. Like if you're using Claude, take the output and feed it to Gemini or feed it to ChatGPT and ask it to challenge, because it'll have different perspectives. And I was trying to figure out a way to explain this. And I thought of it like, I think the best way to think of it is maybe go back to Harry Potter world or college world, where it's like, if you're in Gryffindor and you have a bunch of other classmates in Gryffindor, they're going to have a different perspective than Slytherin or Hufflepuff, or same in college. I'm just doing this for fun, right? Like any college you go to. And it's kind of the same in the AI world. Like if you use Claude to check itself, it's kind of like having a different classmate within that school checking itself, like checking your work. Yeah, they're going to have a different perspective and they can wear different hats, but they've all been trained on the same ideological approach or the same foundational learnings. But if you take some other school of thought, an LLM that's been trained on something fundamentally different, it's going to have a very unique perspective. And so if you really want to stretch this, you can bring these different schools of thought into your approach to really challenge your thought to improve the final output. Now, you don't always have to do this. You put the level of effort based on how important the output is. If you're writing a quick email, you don't need to do this multi-model approach where you're taking different models, orchestrating them and having adversarial checks. But if you're like going to send something that's extremely important, or you're working on a final document, or you're checking accuracy of something, and accuracy is very important, it might make more sense to pull this all in. And then only then, after you run all those checks, then do the human in the loop check at the end. Or you can kind of do sporadic checks throughout to make sure it's on the right path. I'm curious on your thought there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wrote this article on internal controls and harness design.
Yeah.
And, whenever you write, you learn a ton. And I hang
Mhm.
out with like Claude in different ways and ask different questions. And particularly on that adversarial check thing, uh, translated to the accounting world, I think it's called just prepare reviewer,
Yep.
which is the idea
That's
that
right.
a preparer cannot review its own work. And so actually one of the unlocks in harness design that Anthropic hit and how they got long running software builds is to build in the idea of what we would call prepare reviewer. I think they called it executor and, oh my gosh, what's the reviewer? Evaluator. Um, and they had actually taken that from another industry because we're all learning from each other. And so this idea of adversarial check, it's kind of like, oh, you need an SEC reviewer before you go because someone outside of that partner, also an expert with a different lens, with a different view, is doing the thing. Exactly like what you said with the models. But I love this adversarial check, and I didn't realize that it was actually built into the harness
Yep.
design, for example, of Cloud Code, probably in harness or Codex as well. I just haven't been in it as much. Um, but that these are things that they actually built into the design around the software of those models, around those models, to do this check. And so I think that what is really interesting now is there are ways that you can have different models. So, for example, I use, because I've been in Claude quite a bit, but evidently Claude can actually call out to Codex as well. That's actually a function, which is quite interesting.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so I use, for example, Fable as my big brain architect and Sonnet as my builder. And whenever Sonnet finishes building, Fable will do an adversarial check on Sonnet and that work, and we'll find different holes from a different perspective. If I wanted to go further, I could actually give personas to each of my different agent checks, which probably would increase the accuracy. That comes down to how you architect what verification checks you want to go through. Again, I think what's interesting about this is that the concept of the adversarial check is actually not totally new to us. It's just done by a different entity. And it's
Yep.
not like box 3 doesn't exist because human in the loop is there. But, never had, 2 to 3 staff people check each other work before I got it. It wasn't a thing. So this is like a little bit of a luxury, but it also probably is something that's necessary because this is moving so fast and it's able to chug so much data,
Yep.
that we have to start bridging some of these words of like, okay, adversarial check, cool. It's going to increase my accuracy, cool. It's going to mean that I'm looking for different things with human in the loop, but I can also see what those adversarial checks come out with, and I can be more thoughtful about what the verification of what they're checking for is.
Yeah. Definitely. And yeah, I think that is a really good call out that the models now have built a lot of these more advanced models or like code, especially code will specifically do this on any instance, especially when you're using the more advanced models. And so you'll even see it say like, gonna run the adversarial check. And so and that's how powerful they are. And there's a lot of research on even one round of adversarial checks can improve efficacy like quite an alarming amount, like a huge amount. So very interesting. And I like that what you said, like the luxury of having other staff review. How nice would it have been? Like I remember the idea in Big Four, like consulting. It's like, hey, talk to your fellow staff before you submit something to me. So, it's a really good outcome, but it never really happened, right? And you get something, you have to put a bunch of comments on it because no one had the time.
No one at the
But now
time.
we do have this luxury where you have something that you can even have it check your work. That's a type of adversarial check,
Someone
which
should
I
check
think
my
would be
work. Yes, please.
yeah, exactly. And it also goes into that view of someone used to tell me, it's easier to critique than create. And those are two different, very, very different hats. And same for AI. It's like, if you're telling it to create and build something, that's very different than telling it to put on the reviewer hat. And it's very easy. If you send me something, Angela, or I send something to you, it's probably easy to spot like, I would have done this or I would have done that. But when you're in the driver's seat, it's actually pretty challenging to like zoom out and be like, oh, this is the right thing. Or it really takes a lot of judgment and experience. So really cool thing. And I think honestly, just for learning, it's so powerful to watch how it might edit a sentence or edit a conclusion. You can learn through that learning process, right? So very cool. And then one of these big pieces is make sure at the end of the day, this is a huge faux pas I see almost everyone make when they start off. Make sure when there's a citation cited that the sources are real, relevant, and what's claimed. So I've done this enough where I'll do deep research, or I've seen people submit deep research or students, and depending on the models they'll use or the functionality at the time, they'll cite sources, and the sources might seem legitimate, and either they have broken links, they don't have broken links, they cite something that looks relevant but has nothing to do with the topic. It actually takes quite a bit of work to get a citation that's actually relevant and topical and correct. And so there still have to be a critical hat, like, is this a citation that, or untimely, like pulling citations from 1970 probably isn't relevant to today when we're talking about AI, right? And so you want to make sure you have some of these best practices. And honestly, like what you mentioned, and I think is helpful for everyone here, is use it as a learning process. Like if you can't articulate what the AI is talking to you and you try to portray it as your own, you're probably using it wrong. There's like a real risk there if you don't understand the output. So make sure you understand everything that's being communicated or said through the process to the best of your ability, at least with the final output, so you can explain it yourself. AI writing patterns, I think it's a controversial topic, but there's some things like we're very pattern recognition based humans and creatures, and we can tell when something is more written by AI or not, and that will impact people's perceptions knowingly. And so I know like some people intentionally leave errors in their dialogue because it seems more authentic, even if they have AI help write it. And so, and then if it's too polished, it could actually be a problem now. And so you want to avoid some of these pure AI written styles. Make sure that numbers are cited correctly, especially if you're using source documents or in a finance, accounting, business function, because those can be off unless you're using source documents that need to be referenced and ticked and tied. And then, do your basic math, make sure things tie out. And one of the most helpful things that I've done with AI, and AI does a great job, is like, hey, build out a document that ties out every reference and then just check the references. AI can be really good at building up the code that says, this goes to this number ties to this file, this quote ties to this exactly. It can make it really easy to check. But if you don't do, and it will catch its own errors in the process and say, oh, I messed up this, I messed up that. If you don't do that, you could be in a lot of hot water. But would you add anything to the list? Would you challenge anything, Angela? Or what do you see?
I think this is a solid list right now. I think that the more you use this, the more real this list is going to get for you. It is for me. It's very easy to read this list and be like, yeah, of course. and then when you really start using AI quite a bit, you're like, oh, like it is really important. I think at least in the first one, this last week there have been a lot of articles about the big four firms again. So PwC in the Middle East, released this report, and then again false references. And I'm like, did KPMG, Deloitte, EY, everyone's done this. So everyone knows it's a thing, and yet it's still happening. Like, this is so interesting. It's so interesting that it means that we as human beings can be caught off guard again and again and again and again. So having something like this checklist, I think, is really helpful. It is really tempting. And even when I'm reading your checklist, Evan, I'm like, can you just build an agent to do that? And then what you said, then you start looping that, which is, this is actually a question that came up on our internal controls call last, about 2 weeks ago, which was, can you use AI to build the audit evidence that will be audited, right? So it's a little bit of like a meta thing where like, oh, well, we can't trust AI, but then it's also helping us build the evidence. But obviously it's going to be way better at documenting the evidence than I will, right? So it's like, that's a great use case, right? But then you start doing this weird chicken and egg thing. But again, I think that's why it goes back to those verification checks. And when have you designed your system to say, the buck stops at me, I now hold responsibility? And all of these checks are really that. It's like, this is me, I personally understand it, writing style, whatever. I think that's where we have to be thoughtful, and this will evolve constantly. And the tools to do this will evolve constantly. But at a minimum, those references, it's a known thing. I was surprised. I actually, when I was writing my last Substack article, Claude, I think I was in Cowork, but I was using Fable. It was like super diligent. It was like, wait, let's check all these references. Did that really happen? And it like went off and did it by itself without me asking. It like almost questioned my what I was thinking. And I was like, what the heck? But then, like, because it questioned me, I like clicked on every link and I was like, oh, that's true. And so it was an interesting collaboration. But again, I do think this is evolving, and I do think this is a blind spot, but you will only really hit this once you've really, really played with it. And I'm sure there's lots of people that are listening that are here. The reason why I say that is because do not let this human checklist stop you from trying. Because that's what I feel like there's a part of the population that's like, oh no, still got to do everything. And then there's a part of the population where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing so much stuff. Like there's so much, like I just checked so much information. I built all these slide decks, And so for the people that have not played enough, do not let this, like, make a double folder. Go at it. Like, build as much as you can. And then, like, on a cheat model, don't run up your bill. But, like, but then for everyone else, it's like, okay, you built a whole bunch of stuff. Now, how do you wrangle it in? And then this is a wonderful checklist for that.
Yeah, and I really like how you framed just how this is evolving over time. Like it really is changing, and it's really easy to kind of become complacent, specifically around like the audit side of things. I can't tell you how many people you get so quickly accustomed to having all of this information, and so get so comfortable with the AI so fast that you start saying quite silly things. Like I had a client recently who we built this major system that checked thousands of contracts and did all this cool stuff. And then we had to do the hard work of like, well, now we need to check the accuracy of the system. So someone needs to go in there. You still need someone to go in there and actually make sure that the output is correct, right? It's still all like we filled out all the checklists, and the client comes back and says like, well, can't we just have AI do check the checklists? And you're like, well, at what point is a human going to sign off on this and say that they're comfortable? Like, it sounds surprising, but people quickly get to the place where they're like, man, no one wants to do any of this stuff. I don't want to pay for it. Let's just have AI do it all. And there's a real risk there, right? Of like, eventually someone has to take responsibility. Or if you're going to make the AI take responsibility, you need someone who's going to sample and take responsibility for the system and the process over it. You can't just close your eyes and, put your thumbs up or whatever. So very interesting how fast that moves. And I am seeing it all the time.
Yep.
Last piece, and then we're going to close for today's session, is there's really cool publishing tools. And I think maybe we'll talk about it one of the next times, Angela, is like how I was able to go from like just making course notes and making like PowerPoint presentations for my classes to now I have interactive websites that have multiple choice that give feedback and have AI tutors on them. And I constantly refining them with class notes and decks. And there's always I get questions like, how did you make the website? How did you publish this so easily? And there's really easy and amazing free tools now if you own your own domain, and domain ownership is cheap, to manage website development. And I love Vercel and I love GitHub. And the way to think of it is like Vercel essentially hosting your entire platform and can publish and speak with your domain to eventually publish your website, and GitHub manages all the code base and all the instances, so you can roll back and roll forward your code. And Claude can work with these very, very easily, where you can just, as soon as you link them up, you can say, hey, push the code to these websites, and you have live websites. And it's amazing. Like I built my own professional websites. I've had food loggers for myself, a workout logger for myself. Any personalized software you don't really need anymore. You can just have Claude build it for you and host it on your own website. And I've seen people do some amazing things. Like I had a CAO I was talking to the other day who really likes a specific Pilates class. And she has her own website that just books the Pilates class before everyone else because it's so popular. And that's like, she's hosted her own website to find her Pilates classes at these specific instructors and book them. And so this idea of like personalized software is really here if you're using the tools correctly. And these are great for teams, where I've had teams that have internal instances of their own domains and websites, and you can build a team forward website within your company's domain to publish your tools. So like if you're having trouble sharing your skill or sharing your folders, you can also use these tools to share within your company's website, follow your company's protocols and all of that. But if you're able to have that access, you can actually publish your own version of these tools or help logs or whatever. And it can be really, really powerful when you unlock that. And I'm guessing you do something similar for the Gap Savvy website. But are there any other tools you're using for publishing that I should be aware of here, or is this kind of your stack as well?
These are my main ones as well. Yeah, GitHub, I feel like everyone is on GitHub, both from an open source standpoint and like, I think there's also some tactics of like how you learn GitHub. That one's been around forever. And then Vercel, yeah, I also use that for publishing as well. So I feel like these are some of the main hitters. If not Vercel, a lot of people build on Lovable, right, which is kind of this just stacked for you. Yeah, we should do like a little tool session, but I feel like this is a really good place to close because it's that cliffhanger, basically into vibe coding.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we normally go, and you and I do this well, is if you ever have anyone here has specific use cases that you'd want us to cover, I think it'd be really fun to build and try them out, especially if you all have dummy data, or we'll create our own dummy data. But I love doing these hackathons. I think like hackathons used to seem a little corny to me a few years ago. It's like, we're going to do a hackathon. And it sounded to me like you're going to have a speaker in a room, figure out how to get compensated without speaking. It's like, we're going to make you do all the work, But it's actually extremely valuable for these tools to build together and have someone in the room who at least understands it a little bit to build it and to watch people build. That's probably like one of the best ways you can learn. And so I think the grounding that we talked about yesterday, and talking back and forth, or in our last session, talking back and forth has been super helpful. But one of the most valuable things is to just watch a build and to see what we can accomplish through these different processes in this applied theory. And I hope in the lecture series, we can go through things like building a closed deck, building out these websites, other specific use cases, building out financial statements, forecasting. Each specific use case has its own nuances, and it uses different skill packs and different thoughts and different contexts to be really effective. But at the same time follows these, I'm pretty sure these frameworks we discussed are about best in breed for, if you follow these rules, you're going to have a pretty good outcome. And I would love to try to apply them to a few use cases over the next few times. So.
Yeah, I think that'll be fun. And I think what you're saying, Devin, is that these last two videos that we've recorded are hopefully our most boring, and that everything is uphill from here. So exactly. I think it's a wonderful note to land on. So if you didn't like this, the next one will be better. But if you did like it, the other one's going to be amazing.
Yeah, take this, like, there will be sugar with the poison or sugar with the medicine, like, it's kind of a necessary medicine. If you do learn these contexts, like these frameworks, I do think it is really helpful, but it is a bit drier than just watching the stuff build. So I appreciate those who stuck with us through it. And thank you, Angela, for talking through it.
Yeah,
I'll end it here and hope you all catch the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cool.